When the story of Jesus' final hours is retold, it does not unfold as a simple execution in a remote corner of the Roman Empire. Rather, it appears in the Gospels as a convergence of extraordinary signs, each layered with symbolism that stretches far beyond literal description. Earthquakes shook the ground, tombs opened. The great veil of the Jerusalem temple was torn from top to bottom. An unnatural darkness covered the land at midday, and a hardened Roman centurion, accustomed to violence and trained to feel nothing, suddenly confessed, "Truly this was the Son of God." These are not incidental flourishes added for dramatic effect. They belong to a theological narrative, one that confronts both believer and skeptic with profound questions. What do we make of these moments? Were they simply legendary embellishments, or do they carry a testimony about life, death, and humanity's search for God? To explore them is to enter the intersection of history, theology, and mystery, where symbol and event merge, where literature and faith speak in chorus, and where meaning reverberates across centuries. 1. Earthquake. When creation trembled. The earthquake reported at the moment of Jesus' death has long fascinated readers. Geologically, Palestine lies along the Dead Sea transform fault system, making seismic events entirely plausible. Yet the evangelist Matthew does not present the tremor as random geology. He frames it as creation groaning at the death of its maker. Ancient readers, Jewish and Greco-Roman alike, often interpreted natural disasters as cosmic signals, signs of divine displeasure or transition. Here the symbolism is clear. Nature itself responded with more sensitivity than human hearts. Early preachers such as Charles Spurgeon highlighted the irony. Stone and soil reacted to Christ's death, while many people remained unmoved. From a modern scholarly perspective, the literal versus symbolic debate is less central than the theological claim. The narrative insists that Jesus' death reverberated through the very structure of creation. Just as Mount Sinai trembled when the law was given, so now the earth quakes when grace is revealed in crucifixion. Whether or not one takes the seismic event literally, the message is unmistakable. The death of this one man was a cosmic event, not a local tragedy. 2. Tombs opened. Death breached. Even more puzzling is Matthew's unique account that tombs broke open and saints were raised. No other gospel mentions this. For many scholars, the exclusivity suggests theological intention rather than universally remembered history. The language of saints who had fallen asleep reflects early Christian terminology for the dead, not annihilated, but resting until awakened. This imagery ties directly to the larger theme of resurrection. Paul would later call Christ the first fruits of the dead, suggesting that his rising was the opening act of a greater harvest. The resurrected saints in Matthew serve as a prelude, an apocalyptic sign that death's gates had been breached. From an academic perspective, this passage may blend visionary language with theological conviction. Apocalyptic Jewish literature of the Second Temple period often described cosmic upheavals, heavenly visions, and the return of ancient heroes as symbolic signs of God's intervention. Matthew's description resonates with this style, pointing less to journalistic history and more to theological truth. In Jesus, mortality itself was challenged. Whether seen as miraculous history or symbolic prophecy, the message remains weighty. Death is not the final word. The soil of Jerusalem bore witness to the undoing of mortality. The open tomb suggests that no grave is beyond hope, and that Jesus' death inaugurated a new order where resurrection is possible. 3. The torn veil, barriers removed. The tearing of the temple veil is one of the most dramatic symbols in the Passion narrative. This veil separated the Holy of Holies, the sacred space where God's presence was believed to dwell, from the rest of the temple. Only the high priest, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement, could pass beyond it. To imagine the veil torn from top to bottom is to picture divine initiative. No human hand ripped it. The act was God's. Theologically, this meant that the barriers separating humanity from God had collapsed. The old system of sacrifices and priestly mediation had reached its end. Scholars also observe a historical layer. By the time Matthew's Gospel circulated, the Jerusalem temple had already been destroyed in 70 CE. To his audience, the torn veil could symbolize both the literal end of temple worship and the spiritual inauguration of a new way to encounter God, through Christ, not ritual. From a faith perspective, the veil's tearing resonates as an ultimate act of grace. Humanity no longer stands at a distance, but is invited to approach the holy without fear. From a critical perspective, it reads as a pointed critique of institutional religion. God cannot be confined by walls or controlled by priestly systems. Either way, the veil's collapse proclaims a radical accessibility to the divine. 4. Midday darkness, judgment and mourning. Few images are as haunting as the report that darkness covered the land from noon until 3. Astronomically, a solar eclipse could not have occurred during Passover since it coincided with a full moon. Thus, the darkness is presented as supernatural, symbolic, or both. In Jewish prophetic tradition, midday darkness signified divine judgment. Amos had declared that God would make the sun go down at noon as a sign of coming wrath. In Greco-Roman accounts, sudden darkness often accompanied the deaths of emperors and heroes, signaling cosmic mourning. Within this cultural framework, the gospel narrative places Jesus' death on the same cosmic scale. Light is withdrawn, creation mourns, and humanity is left in shadow. Whether understood literally as a miracle or literarily as a symbol, the darkness conveys meaning. This was not the death of a criminal alone, but an event of cosmic consequence. The darkness challenges us to consider the gravity of injustice. When the innocent dies, the world itself recoils. When truth is crucified, creation veils its face. This imagery transcends literal explanation, speaking to the moral and cosmic weight of the crucifixion. 5. The centurion's confession. Recognition in an unlikely place. The climax of these signs comes not from nature, but from a man, the Roman centurion. He was a career soldier, hardened by countless executions. His role was to ensure crucifixions were carried out with ruthless efficiency. Yet confronted with the earthquake, the darkness, and most importantly, Jesus' manner of suffering, with dignity, forgiveness, and silence, he uttered words of recognition. Truly, this was the Son of God. From a historical critical perspective, the phrase may have meant a righteous man or favored by the gods. But within Matthew's Gospel, it becomes a Christological confession. Ironically, while Israel's leaders condemned Jesus, a Roman officer recognized his divine identity. Later tradition gave this soldier the name Longinus and claimed he became a believer and even a martyr. While such traditions are unverifiable, The narrative significance is profound. The centurion represents the outsider, the unexpected witness. The very man who helped execute Jesus becomes the first to recognize his true identity. This confession illustrates the paradox of the cross. It pierces even the most calloused heart. It demonstrates that recognition of truth can arise in unlikely places, even among the instruments of oppression. When these five signs are read together, the earthquake, the open tombs, the torn veil, the midday darkness, and the centurion's confession, they form more than a series of wonders. They become a chorus of testimonies. Nature bears witness as the earth trembles and the sky darkens. Religion bears witness as the temple veil collapses. History bears witness as ancient saints rise. Empire bears witness as a Roman soldier confesses. Together, these voices affirm that Jesus' death was no ordinary event. For the believer, these signs affirm redemption, God's plan unveiled in the cross. For the historian, they reveal how early Christians used apocalyptic motifs to interpret trauma. For the seeker, they serve as metaphors of hope. Even in the bleakest hour, new life can emerge. It is essential to recognize that the gospel writers were not dispassionate reporters. They wrote as theologians, interpreting events for communities wrestling with faith under persecution and uncertainty. The extraordinary signs surrounding Jesus' death reflect both memory and meaning. From a historical angle, the earthquake and darkness may reflect real natural events interpreted theologically. The open tombs and torn veil may represent symbolic or visionary elements, crafted to communicate truth beyond literal fact. The centurion's confession may condense the gradual recognition of outsiders into a single dramatic moment. From a theological angle, each sign communicates the same central conviction. Jesus' death was the decisive act of God. Through his suffering, barriers fell, death lost its grip, creation itself responded, and unlikely witnesses proclaimed truth. These signs also speak beyond their immediate context. They address perennial human questions. How do we make sense of suffering? Where is God in the midst of injustice? Can death be overcome? How do we recognize truth when it appears in unexpected forms? The earthquake reminds us that truth unsettles our foundations. The open tombs proclaim that no grave is beyond hope. The torn veil declares that barriers to God are never permanent. The darkness warns that injustice has cosmic weight. The centurion's confession urges us to see divinity even in suffering. Taken together, these signs challenge us to look deeper, beyond surface appearances, beyond despair, beyond literalism, to discern meaning and mystery. The Passion narrative, with its extraordinary signs, is not merely about what happened 2 millennia ago. It is about how communities interpreted those events as revelations of divine love and justice. It is about how symbols speak to truths larger than themselves. For believers, the signs affirm faith and redemption. For scholars, they demonstrate the power of narrative to convey theological meaning. For seekers, they offer a reminder that even in defeat, new life whispers. To reflect on these events is to step closer to mystery. The cross is both a place of suffering and a site of revelation. It is where nature groans, where history shifts, where human hearts are pierced, and where hope rises out of despair. The signs of Jesus' final hours invite us all, whether faithful, skeptical, or searching, to consider that in the very midst of death, life may be waiting to dawn.